What happens when a badly burned bobcat, on the brink of death, places its trust in one stranger and one stranger only? And what if I told you that silent bond was what saved them both from the edge of despair? This is the true story of Juniper, a wild bobcat burned alive in a devastating wildfire, and Daniel, a firefighter haunted by the lives he couldn't save. In this video, you will witness the miraculous recovery of a wild creature that by all odds shouldn't have survived. Understand the power of presence and patience, something that goes beyond language, and feel the deep connection between man and nature, a connection that can heal even wounds no one sees. Have you ever met a creature that made you want to step back, only for you to never want to leave again? Before we dive into the details, I want you to remember one thing. Sometimes, what we rescue ends up rescuing us. A scorched land, a wounded wild animal, and a man bearing the scars of lives lost. The fire began with a dry wind at the end of March, weaving its way through the brittle leaf beds of the Blue Ridge Mountains like it had been waiting. Within a single night, it swept across 6 ridges, consuming nearly 40,000 hectares of forest. Familiar trails vanished into a sea of smoke. Fragile rooftops turned to ash. And every creature, wild or tame, ran in panic if they had time to run at all. The Blue Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had already been overwhelmed since early spring. Dr. Naomi Chen, the center's director with 12 years of experience treating injured animals, had grown accustomed to the smell of singed fur, the haunted eyes, the whimpers of fragile lives. But that morning, when the rescue crew placed the carrier down, she knew this wasn't a typical case. "We're out of space," Naomi said, voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We just transferred out 3 owls because we didn't have enough cages." The firefighter silently opened the carrier. Inside was a young bobcat, badly burned, all 4 paws blistered, fur charred and matted into raw wounds. It didn't snarl, didn't run, didn't resist. It simply lay there, curled into a corner, as if the world had already ended. They named her Juniper, after the low shrubs found on the mountain slope where she'd been discovered. Now, nothing but ash. After emergency care, Naomi sighed. Physically, she might survive. But her spirit, I'm not sure. Unlike most predators that lash out in pain, Juniper had completely shut down. Each time someone entered the room, she pressed herself into the farthest corner, trembling like the last leaf in a storm. "This animal isn't afraid of us," Naomi told Kelsey, a behavior specialist. "She's afraid of existing." 2 weeks passed. Not once did Juniper eat in the presence of people. Security footage showed her stepping out only at 3 a.m., when the world was deathly still, pacing small, anxious circles over and over, like her very memory was burning her from the inside. One afternoon, Kelsey sat down in the hallway, back against the wall, facing away from the room. She didn't look in. She didn't speak. She simply read aloud, voice steady and warm, as if telling a story to someone who had lost all faith. When she stood to leave, something made her pause. Juniper was still in her corner, but for the first time since arriving at the center, her eyes weren't glued to the crack in the wall. She was looking at her, hesitant, but real. A thread-thin connection, like a fragile strand between 2 souls who had both been consumed by fire. "I need 48 more hours," Kelsey whispered to Naomi, eyes still fixed on Juniper. "There's someone still inside her. I'm sure of it." And they agreed. Not knowing that just 1 day later, a stranger would walk through the door, carrying the scent of old smoke, a hoarse voice, and a silent memory that the wild bobcat recognized before even he did. No one at the center knew that an unannounced visitor would arrive and change Juniper's story completely. Saturday morning, overcast skies. Misty rain was falling quietly on the weathered roof of the Blue Ridge Rehab Center. Naomi was sorting through backlogged reports when the front door creaked open. A tall man in a dark ranger coat stepped inside. His face was sun-worn, beard scruffy, eyes exhausted as if carrying countless sleepless nights. "Just stopping by to report a few trapped animals near the North Hollow Ridge," he said in a gravelly voice, placing a report folder on the front desk. "3 fawns and a mother fox, I believe. Definitely needs assistance." Sophia, the volunteer coordinator, looked up from her computer. Her eyes caught the name signed at the bottom. "You're Daniel Whitmore, right?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I won't be staying long." "Well, then maybe you should meet one of our patients." Sophia led Daniel down a quiet hallway, past rescue enclosures. A bald eagle with a broken wing sleeping beneath a heat lamp, 3 baby raccoons curled together in a blanket-lined crate, and a mountain lion recovering from a deep leg wound. "We're stretched thin," she murmured, afraid to disturb the fragile calm. "But there's one case that's left all of us helpless." She stopped outside an isolation room. The lights were dimmed low, a curtain half-drawn to block out glare. Inside, in a large mesh crate by the wall, lay a creature curled up like a pile of unburnt ash. "Juniper," she said softly. "Found at the mountain's base, the worst burned zone. Bobcat, about 1.5 years old, 3rd-degree burns. But it's not the skin that scares us most, it's her eyes. They're empty, like she no longer believes in her own existence." Daniel didn't move. His eyes locked on the tiny frame, flinching with every echo of boots, back arched, ears pinned to her skull. But something made him stop. The smell in the room. It was old wood smoke, damp ash after rain. The scent he had lived with for 3 weeks in last year's wildfire. The one where... Daniel swallowed hard, remembering the slope where he'd found a tiny creature pinned beneath a scorched pine, unmoving, but breathing. Saying nothing, Daniel sat down on the floor, 2 meters from the cage. He didn't look directly at her, didn't speak, just leaned against the wall, breath slow and steady, like he was trying to bring stillness back into the air. Sophia glanced at him, tilting her head. "What are you doing?" "Just letting her know I bring no threat," Daniel murmured. "With animals, this damaged, calm presence often works better than any technique." "Should I get Dr. Chen?" "Not yet. I just need a little time." When Sophia left, Daniel began to speak, his voice so soft it was almost a whisper. It was unclear if he was talking to Juniper or merely to the darkness. "I remember that day," he began. "The fire came from the south. We thought we could contain it until the wind changed." Juniper didn't react, still curled up. But Daniel continued, speaking of chaos, of the cries of wildlife in the night, of the moment he had to pull back and leave behind the creatures that didn't make it out. "I haven't been able to sleep since that day," he admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see a small deer, singed, still standing and trembling in the fire, not knowing where to run." 15 minutes passed. No sound came from the cage. But then, Daniel saw something. Juniper's ears, they had perked up. She didn't move toward him, didn't shift position, but the ears just slightly turned in his direction, following the sound, accepting the voice. Daniel lowered his tone, slower now, as if whispering something only the 2 of them could understand. "I don't know if I deserve to be alive either, but if you're still here, then maybe something inside you hasn't gone out yet." A moment later, Daniel bowed his head and smiled sadly, but with a sense of release. "Thank you," he whispered, "for listening." When Daniel spoke of the mountain goat that died in his arms, a small creature, body charred, eyes still wide and fixed on the volcano as if waiting for a miracle that never came. His voice cracked. The sound broke like a burned branch beneath his feet. He bowed his head, hands clasped together. "I held it till the very end," he whispered. "And when it took its last breath, it felt like I had killed another soul just because I was too late." In that heavy silence, something nearly impossible happened. Juniper moved, just a few inches. But it was clear, out of the dark corner where she'd been buried like ashes. One paw stretched forward, her head tilted slightly as if trying to hear better. Daniel didn't move, but his heart jumped, like he'd just received a message in a language no one teaches. "I understand," he murmured, still not meeting her eyes. "I know what it's like to be surrounded by fire. Smoke sticks to your skin. The wind was screaming like it wanted to tear the world apart, and that moment when you realize there's no way out." A faint sound, maybe a breath, maybe a soft moan, not fully formed, came from the cage. Juniper didn't approach, but her eyes had changed. No longer blank, no longer empty. Something was stirring. Something touches a memory. When Naomi and Kelsey returned, they froze in the doorway, afraid even to breathe. Before them was a scene they had never witnessed. Juniper was not hiding. She was still at a distance, but sitting, not curled up, not bracing against the world, watching Daniel as if he were the only still point in her collapsing world. "Who are you?" Naomi asked, almost in a whisper. "Daniel Whitmore," he replied without turning. "I'm a ranger from Hollow Creek. I worked the early season fire on the southern line." "What did you do to her?" "I just talked." Daniel slowly stood, brushing his hands on his pants. "Sometimes all they need is someone who doesn't run when they go silent." "Can you come back?" Naomi asked. "There's something in this cat, like she's waiting for something." Daniel nodded. "I'll come back tomorrow morning, if that's all right." Kelsey glanced at his clothes. His boots were still dusted with ash. The dark ranger coat still held the faint scent of old smoke. Naomi squinted. "Why are you still wearing your field gear?" "I just finished my shift." A pause. Kelsey murmured, almost to herself, "That smell. Maybe." She remembers. The smoke, the ash, the burnt wood, the scent she breathed in when she was pulled from under that tree. In the days that followed, Daniel returned regularly, sometimes with a scrap of his old coat from the fire, sometimes with a half-burnt branch, things no one else thought might trigger memory in a wild cat. On the third day, as Daniel sat beside the cage, reading softly from the worn leather notebook he always carried, Juniper walked to the edge of the steel door, not quite approaching, but choosing to step out of the shadows. Her golden eyes stayed fixed on him. No more avoidance. No more suspicion. Daniel looked up, voice low and steady. "You remember, don't you?" he whispered. "The slope near the dry creek, under that fallen tree. I was the one who pulled the trunk off you. I thought you were already gone." Juniper didn't growl, didn't hiss. She made a sound, soft, brief, something like the meow of a house cat recognizing someone familiar. Something tender slipped between instinct and survival. Naomi, watching the surveillance screen, nearly dropped her pen. "No way," she whispered. "That's the same Bobcat?" Kelsey asked softly, eyes never leaving the image. Daniel was still. "I'm not sure. That fire was chaos. I remember a cat under a burned tree. Thought it was dead, but maybe." Naomi quickly flipped through the intake records. Juniper had been brought in on March 25th by a Hollow Creek rescue team. No names listed. To be sure, the next day, Daniel wore clean clothes, free of smoke. Juniper didn't react. But when he placed a charred scrap of fabric, one he'd wrapped around his hand during the rescue, before the cage, Juniper stepped forward, sniffed, then gently rubbed her head against it. "It's you," Daniel whispered. "It's really you." After 10 minutes of silence, with the hum of the fan and sunlight filtering through the drawn curtain, Juniper did what no one dared hope for. She stepped out of the corner. Slowly, one breath-counted step at a time, she moved toward Daniel, less than a meter away, no more retreating into shadows, no more avoiding every gaze. She stood there, her amber eyes locked onto the man sitting still, notebook in hand. From outside the observation room, Kelsey raised a hand to her mouth and whispered, barely able to believe what she saw. "Oh my God, I've never seen a psychologically traumatized wildcat change this fast." From that moment on, a special bond began to take root, not through words, not through leashes or training, but through presence. Daniel rearranged his shifts, requesting overnight or early morning duty just to spend more time at the center. He came every day, sometimes with an old book, sometimes just to sit in silence. Juniper began allowing other staff to approach, but only if Daniel was present. It was crucial for her continued medical care. "He's healing her," Naomi told Kelsey as they stood by the window, looking into the room. Then, in a deeper, quieter tone, she added, "And I think she's healing him too." Indeed, Daniel was changing. The nightmares from the fire began to fade. The nights waking up in cold sweat, riddled with guilt, became fewer. He started sharing things he had never spoken aloud. About the first time he saw a deer pinned under a burning branch. About the child he couldn't save in time. About the haunting question, could I have done more? Through his time with Juniper, he saw himself alone, hurt but still alive. "Part of why I became a firefighter," he told Naomi one rainy afternoon, "was to save lives that couldn't save themselves. But sometimes there's too much loss, and you have to learn to live with only saving a few." Naomi nodded. "And that's exactly why we do this work. Not to save them all, but to give the survivors a chance." 2 months passed. Juniper's physical wounds had healed. Her fur had grown back. Her eyes regained their shine. But the big question remained. Could she return to the wild? The place that was once home, but now maybe a haunting memory. "The question," Naomi said during the final assessment meeting, "isn't whether she can hunt or survive. It's, can she live without Daniel?" Evidence showed Juniper still responded poorly when Daniel wasn't around. She would tolerate the nurses, even allow vaccinations, but only if Daniel was in the room. Without him, her gaze would freeze over again. "I've thought of a solution," Daniel said, his voice low but hopeful. "I spoke with the Bureau of Land Management. There's a semi-wild reserve near my ranger station. They have a post-release monitoring program." Naomi paused, speechless for a moment. "So, she'd be free, but you'd still be nearby in case anything happened." "Exactly," Daniel nodded. "She'd be a real Bobcat, but not alone." A crisp autumn morning. Golden leaves were scattered across the narrow path leading into the forest. A small group stood by a clearing at the reserve's edge. Daniel wore the same scorched jacket from that day, the scent of smoke long gone but the memories still clinging. The large carrier was placed on the ground. Juniper inside staring out at the green expanse ahead. Not eager, not afraid, just still. "We chose this spot because it's near a stream, has good prey availability, and minimal human activity," the ecologist explained. "Remote cameras will help us track her without causing distress." Naomi and Kelsey stood nearby, eyes misty. They had released many animals back into the wild, but never had their hearts felt this heavy. "Juniper," Daniel opened the carrier door and crouched. She didn't bolt out like most animals do. She looked at him. For a long time. He smiled, voice soft as wind. "You're free now. This is your new home." Juniper stepped out slowly. Her nose touched the earth, then she raised her head toward the towering trees. After a few steps, she paused and turned. Her gaze met Daniel's one last time, as if to remember him. "Go," Daniel whispered. "I'll always be nearby." Juniper ran. Light as wind, sure-footed like one who knows exactly where to go. At the forest's edge, she turned back once more, then vanished behind the trees. "You did the right thing," Naomi said, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder, "and we'll still be able to track her through the chip." In the months that followed, Daniel checked the tracker data every morning. Juniper was moving farther, establishing new territory, hunting successfully, and living like a true wild bobcat. Sometimes, during his shifts near the reserve, Daniel would sit quietly at the forest's edge, just to watch, hoping to catch a glimpse of a familiar shadow. He rarely saw her. But for Daniel, knowing that Juniper was out there, alive, free, and no longer afraid, was enough. Sometimes, when his route took him past the edge of the reserve, Daniel would stop. Not to do anything specific, just to sit quietly in the grass, where the forest touched the sky, eyes fixed on the deep green ahead. He rarely saw Juniper. The bobcat had truly become part of the wild. Quiet, elusive, and free. But just knowing she was still out there, still breathing, no longer curled into a corner of fear, was enough. The tracker data confirmed Juniper had established her own territory, was hunting efficiently, and moving through farther valleys with ease. No longer the creature huddled in a wire cage under dim lights, but a spirit of the forest, wild and whole. A year after the fire swallowed the mountainside, Daniel returned to the old ridge. Once, this place had been ruined. Charred soil, blackened trees like half-finished sketches of despair. But now, new grass pushed through the hardened earth. Wildflowers swayed yellow and soft in the early summer breeze. Between scorched trunks, green returned like the forest's whisper. "We are still here. We still live." Daniel stood silently, boots wet with dew. The air carried the scent of new earth, faintly pine and ash, but no longer threatening. A soft rustle behind him made him turn. Juniper, no collar, no cage, no call. Just a creature with ash-dusted fur, ears high, golden eyes like the setting sun, standing a few paces away, present as if she'd never left. "Look," Daniel said gently, warm-voiced. The grass grew back. After everything. Juniper didn't understand his words, but she understood the silence. She knew the air here no longer smelled of fear, and she knew this man had never forgotten her. They stood together, man and beast, no fences, no words needed. Juniper lifted her head, ears turning with the wind. Daniel leaned down slightly, his hand resting gently on the same stone they once sat upon. A quiet continuation, unspoken, yet understood. In that moment, they were no longer the rescuer and the rescued. They were simply two survivors. Both bear scars from the fire. Both are learning how to trust again. And both chose to stand in a world that had burned, but would grow green once more. A wildcat who once trembled in the dark. A man whose dreams once burned inside nightmares. Now they stood side by side, not bound, but connected. Not through words, but through trust. If this story stirred something in your heart, please follow. Share it with someone searching for hope. And remember, sometimes one right connection can save an entire soul. If this story made you smile, shed a tear, or simply fall silent for a few moments, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story about life, about trust, and about the quiet miracles hidden in the simplest of things. Share this video with someone who needs a ray of hope, and don't forget to leave a comment. Tell us about the last time you felt truly healed. Because sometimes, just one gentle touch from a small creature is enough to remind us the heart always knows how to come home.